I have the advantage among my colleagues that some of Mary's work is on display here at NCECA over at the Standard Ceramic Facility. So in light of images, which I would have liked to have shown, please do get over there and see her work. There's some other great shows in that area as well, and at Standard specifically. So it is very humbling, and it's a great honor to be able to speak about Mary Bowron, who passed away last year. It's also very intimidating, not so much to speak about her work, but to speak about the force of nature that she was. So I'm going to begin with a voice that's not my own. Rebecca Hoffberger, director of the Visionary Art Museum in my hometown of Baltimore. Rebecca said of Mary, "She is that one-of-a-kind radiance one encounters, if really lucky, but a handful of times in a long lifetime," unquote. I count myself among the fortunate. I met Mary in 1998 when I was in my first year of art school at the Maryland Institute College of Art, also in Baltimore. And my first impressions of Mary were on the Richter scale, life-shakingly inspirational. And I know that I am only one of many people who were so affected by her. Art school. Art school, two words that at least once for many of us have seemed a contradictory conjunction. Indeed, for all of its benefits, an academic art education can seem a systematic, conventional, stifling, and even soulless thing. Mary didn't go to art school or any school for ceramics, and she didn't swim in the mainstream. She didn't go to conferences, give presentations, or promote herself. Mary Bowron was the first and one of the last artists I have met who was truly free. Mary had a set of values, an integrity, a commitment, and a sensitivity that I have rarely encountered throughout the world. This enormous and endless world, Mary lived off the radar on a farmstead in Boyds, Maryland, the limitless confines of a rural potter. And every inch of her space, much like every moment of her life, was given to a creativity that was absolute and relentless. And I remember her hands, the palpable energy of her spirit, stacks of pottery everywhere. I remember a person who lived with her art in a way that I had never seen because her life was very much art. I remember how quickly Mary conveyed that nothing was impossible, and I remember the impact of a sudden revelation that there was more to life than the existing structures of my world could provide. And if young people, if young artists ever feel that the compromises they have to make are a kind of prison, I knew when I met her that I was staring through the bars of my own prison at an absolute beauty. Those are my impressions then. And the last time I saw her, the last time I visited her farm was with a good friend of mine in the Maryland State folklorist, Chad Buterbaugh. Chad Buterbaugh is the person in my state who knows the most about local traditions and culture. He joined me going to Mary's farmstead because he was so struck by her work and also by her story. He was not there because Mary was a folk artist. The category of folk artist seems wrong, just as the categories of self-taught artist or outsider artist seem wrong, even if there are some linings of truth in those labels. Mary wasn't just one kind of artist, just as she didn't work exclusively in clay. She simply didn't fit into a box, and she sure as hell would not have wanted to be in one. If I had to choose any label, I would call Mary a visionary. And I'm not using this word to suggest that Mary was chasing some unseen ultimate object that was divinely planted in her mind. Perhaps she was, but I am using this word because Mary worked as only a visionary artist can, free of boundaries, conventions, expectations, and in pursuit of something of profound meaning. In the photograph I would have shown, you would have seen Mary's onigami kiln in its final state, half loaded with unfired works. Those unfired works were lamented by a lot of people, but probably most painful for her longtime friend and assistant, Robert Kelly. But there is a voice that tells me that Mary's works would have never been finished. Mary worked up until the moment that she no longer could, and I think that would have been the case no matter how her last years had played out. We had some wonderful pictures of her farmstead and her studio, packed to the gills with her work. It was an experience to be at Mary's home, and I have talked to several people, many of whom I didn't know even knew Mary, who had some of the same powerful impressions of her space, because her living space was synonymous with her creative space in a way that I really have never seen. Many of the last works of Mary's that made the strongest impression on me were sculptural. There are a series of heads which are not on display here at NCECA, but they have been collected en masse by the Kohler Foundation and also by the Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore. These are figures who are blindfolded and without ears, witnesses that cannot speak. These are silent witnesses that were meant to express the psychological imprisonment of the millions of people who are witnesses to things so damaging that they cannot or will not speak of them. The majority of Mary's later art, according to her daughter, spoke of suppressed expression, or should I say that her work spoke up for the suppressed. I believe that now we're getting a little tricky without the images, so give me just a second here to adapt. If you do make it over to standard, I think what you will see is that there's a quality in her heads, in her Silent Witness series, which you will also be able to see hopefully at Baltimore Clayworks next year and at the Visionary Art Museum if you are in Maryland. There's a fluidity to much of Mary's sculpture. It's the freedom of her hand, her fearless experimentation, her intuitive use of the material, also her sensitivity and her empathy. Mary's works also convey her sense of beauty. And while Mary was no enemy of good aesthetics, she always sought to go beyond conventional beauty. I'm going to end here without images, but I will be showing some of her work at Baltimore Clayworks next year. Over at Standard, her works can be seen along with those by her friend, longtime close friend Jack Schroy, who's in the audience, and I want to close with a statement that Jack made about Mary. Mary had to live a certain way, and she had no choice about that. She didn't want to use her work to call attention to herself. She was bewildered by self-representation, and she was leery of it. She wasn't going to develop that aspect of herself without compromising her own soul. And I thank you all very much for coming here to... Wonderful. Can I see what's on the screen? So, with just minimal narration now that I've gone through my talk, this is Robert Kelly and Maryland State folklorist Chad Buderbaugh in Mary's Onondaga kiln as it was left when she had to leave her home.
We can't hear you!
This is going to be... Okay. That's Robert Kelly, her longtime assistant, and Chad Buderbaugh, Maryland State folklorist in Mary's Onondaga kiln as it was left in its final state. Some photos of, this is the kiln building here. This is inside of Mary's home. And here's some of the Silent Witness series. So these very... This is going extremely well. Mary had this wonderful she had this wonderful fluidity in her work, and in these particular pieces, this became a contorted kind of visceral fluidity that was so expressive of I think the pain that she felt for so many people in the world who were not able to speak for themselves or to speak of the traumas that they endured. Another of her sculptural pieces. These are a couple of her sandbox pots. And she did work in many, many materials. I mean, she was a brilliant artist across the spectrum of media. Paint, print, clay, metal, found object. She was very committed to ceramics, and that's why I'm showing only her ceramic work here, some of her throne work. A couple slab platters. Some tile work. And this is a tea bowl she gave me when I first met her 20 years ago, and which for me still carries very much the spirit of the artist. And that's Mary Bowron. Thank you very much.